Hello, welcome once again to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mail. We got Sports 25 to life and 7-game slate, so this won't be too in-depth for you. All but one game is a 7.5 run total or less, so very few must-have bats. Not a whole lot of contrarian anything because there's a whole lot of similar totals, similar pitchers. Yep. Your two guys at the top are by far your top options. We talked about in the pitcher nail down if you want a little bit more in-depth. Chris Sale, Johnny Cueto. Sale 12,000, Johnny Cueto 10.3. Cueto a bigger favorite. Sale you expect higher upside from. So take your pick with those two guys. You can't really go wrong. And because there's so many low totals, not a lot of bats you have to pay for. So it's certainly plausible to think that you could fit both of those guys into a lineup tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely possible. There's quite a few value hitters today on the board. And there's not a lot of other pitchers that you get really excited about. We talked about in the pitcher podcast. I think John Neese is probably my third option there, and he's just a totally different animal on DraftKings tonight. I mean, I think you basically have to have one of Sale or Cueto. I think they're both going to be really highly owned. Having both of them is definitely going to give you an advantage over the people that are just playing one. I definitely prefer Sale because I just think there's like a little bit better floor, a little bit more upside there. Cueto looks a little bit safer on paper just because he's a minus 220 favorite against Detroit, and Detroit is loaded with righties right now. But I definitely just prefer Sale, even with the $1,700 price increase there. If Cueto helps you get bats that you like, I mean, that's definitely worth it. But that's what it's going to come down to for me is what I end up deciding to do with my hitters because I feel pretty good about both of these guys. Then, like I mentioned with Neese, 6,800 on DraftKings against a Colorado team that has a ton of lefties. He's a minus 185 favorite. He's been pitching really, really consistently for the Mets lately. The price is really what puts him in a great spot, though. I mean, 6,800, you don't even need a great game. He can give you probably very close to that if he's on today against a Colorado team that just really struggles against lefties right now. And the Mets have been hitting better overall, which has been helpful to all of their pitchers because they're actually putting runs on the board and giving them at least some run support these days. Yeah,
and like you said, I mean, he has been pitching well. 5 of his last 7 starts, he's allowed 1 earned run or 0. So he's been very good. And, I mean, a lot of factors go in his favor. I'm sure he'll be a pretty popular play tonight. So you're not sneaking it by anybody to play him in your tournaments tonight. But I think I agree, especially, not even price considered, really. I think he's the number 3 option anyway, but especially with that
probably.
Price. Because your other guys, I mean, you got Matt Shoemaker, obviously a good contrarian GPP play because he's got big-time upside, 10 Ks in 2 of his last 3, finally looking like the pitcher we know. But he's also pitching at U.S. Cellular, which we know, big-time park for home runs. You got a lot of big bats on the other side, and Shoemaker does have pretty significant issues with allowing home runs so far this season, really throughout his career, 1.39 per 9. So he's an option, but a fairly risky. I don't say fairly risky. He has some risk, I guess. To him. And then the other guys we had mentioned, Wei-Yin Chen against Seattle. You're really just worried about Nelson Cruz. Most of the other guys, the lefty-lefty matchup. And then Ian Kennedy, just because there's really no other options. I mean, he's not an awesome option, but he's not a guy I'm scared of playing. I don't doubt that he'll give you a fine start. I just don't expect huge things out of him.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at probably 18 to 20, like what he's been doing every game lately, where you don't get a ton of upside out of him. You're paying for consistency with him, though, which is something I don't really like doing, just because you're giving up a lot of upside there. Where, I mean, even with a couple other guys we haven't mentioned yet, Ruby De La Rosa has some nice upside against Philly today as a minus 150 favorite. Obviously, Philly's been pretty good, but overall, I think he's a decent option at 7,500. Probably my least favorite option out of everybody we've named so far. And then the last guy that I would consider at all, David Holmberg for Cincinnati, is stupid cheap at 4,700 at San Diego in Petco Park, facing a Padres offense that's been the worst in the league since the trade deadline. I think you can feel pretty good about him if you want to go really cheap. I just don't see a reason to do it today because it's tough to spend the rest of the money if you go with him.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's like you mentioned on the pitcher nail down. It kind of seems like you could take that risk, but there's really no reason to take that risk because there's not elite bats you need everywhere unless you're really just trying to make that contrarian lineup that's got money left over no one's going to have. But that's probably not the way to go tonight. So
yeah, I mean, like moving over to catcher right now, here's a position that's absolutely impossible to spend any money at.
Yep.
I mean, I have Wellington Castillo as my highest projected catcher today. He's questionable.
Yep.
3,600. If he's in the lineup, that's who I'm going with. He's been hitting fifth against righties. I feel pretty good about him. My second option, I think Derek Norris against Holmberg, assuming you're not using him, is a fine play at 3,400. Norris hasn't been very good lately, but he's going to get a bunch of at-bats, hitting second in the order against a lefty, which is his better split. He's a 313 WOBA against them. So I think he's an interesting option. My last guy that I am really looking at very much at all is Brian Pena for absolute minimum. If he's in the starting lineup for Cincinnati today, is flat 2,000 on DraftKings, facing Kennedy. He's been hitting sixth against righties. I don't really love it in Petco Park against a pretty consistent pitcher, but I mean, that's probably the way I would go if I was looking to go with two really strong starters like we mentioned possibly doing.
Yeah, and I'm on board with all those guys, and I'll throw out one more guy too, young guy that's been hitting the ball really well since he's come up. Jesus Montero, $3,000. We know he's been a top prospect. It remains to be seen if he can show some consistency, but I mean, he does hit lefties well, and I'm not going out of my way to pick on Chen, but $3,000, he certainly provides you some GPP upside. All right,
I can't argue with that.
Yeah, definitely. First base options here. You got to love Paul Goldschmidt against Aaron Harang. $5,600 is going to be steep for you most night. Probably not so bad tonight because you're saving money at a lot of other places. So got to love him. Jose Abreu, been on fire, gets Matt Shoemaker today. So he's a guy you're certainly targeting at $4,900. But then if you're looking for cheaper guys, I think my favorite GPP target is going to be Ryan Howard at $4,000 in Arizona against Ruby De La Rosa, because Ruby De La Rosa, as we know, a fine pitcher but horrible against lefties. 399 WOBA, 17 homers this year. Obviously, that's the highest total on the night. Philly, if they're going to get to him, it's going to be with left-handed bats. And obviously, Ryan Howard on the tail end of his career, but he's got plenty of power left in that bat.
Yeah, definitely. I think the guy I like in that situation, Lucas Duda at 4,100, facing a righty in gray. His numbers are a little messy because most of his starts so far have come against or come in Coors Field. So he's allowing a 447 WOBA to lefties right now, which, I mean, is probably unrealistic in New York. Duda's been 341 against righties, though. I mean, it's a pretty good matchup. Big thing with Duda is he has a ton of power against righties with a 230 ISO. I think he's a pretty solid GPP play, although I wouldn't throw him into must-play category like I would if somehow Gray was allowing a 447 WOBA on the road or something like that. But I think he's definitely a pretty interesting GPP play there.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And then a guy who's probably going to end up being a pretty popular play coming off a 2-homer game, Ryan Zimmerman. I think I prefer him at third base where there aren't very many options tonight on DraftKings, at least $3,400 for him. He's a guy that I like as a cheap option. I'd probably even pay a little bit more for him, honestly. But I think he's going to be fairly popular. And if you want a contrarian play, Victor Martinez, still much better of a hitter than a $3,600 price tag indicates. You don't love the matchup, of course, against Cueto, who's actually been very good against left-handed batters this year. But, Victor Martinez, while he's still cheap, I'll play him in GPPs against anybody at that price.
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
All right, second base options. Your favorite second baseman, well, I don't know about tonight, but most nights. Ben Zobrist up top, $4,400 against Matt Boyd. We've seen good Matt Boyd and we've seen very bad Matt Boyd, and Ben Zobrist has just been kind of fitting right in with the rest of the Royals, just very consistent. You know what you're getting out of him. He's a great cash game option, and second base is a pretty barren position tonight anyway. So if you're not paying up for him, I'll probably go down to either Chase Utley, who probably will be leading off, assuming he's back in the lineup today at $3K, or Anthony Rendon against Brett Anderson. We know he mashes lefties.
Yeah, I mean, Rendon feels like he's playing as a lefty almost every day lately.
Yeah.
He's been he's gotten a hit in every game but one over the last 9 games, I think. But, I mean, he hasn't been particularly good. At some point, he's going to break out of this, kind of getting back into the groove thing, I feel like. I mean, he's been good enough that I know he's not terrible, but he hasn't been as good as his WOBA numbers against lefties would indicate over the last couple of years. And I mean, he's been fine with a 358 WOBA against them this year, but I think he's got a couple big games coming against a lefty here at some point. That's probably my favorite play if you're not paying up for Zobrist. I agree Zobrist is the top play today at 4,400. He's got a ton of power from the right side. Like you mentioned, Boyd can give up a lot of home runs at times.
Yep.
Not a ton else I like today. I liked Howie Kendrick a little bit, but it looks like he's unlikely to play tonight. It looks like he has a knee thing. Is that right? I know he's getting an MRI today. That's all I
think it was
really
a
know for sure.
hamstring. So,
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
connected
don't
to
think
his
he's
knee,
gonna.
So.
Yeah, I don't think he's gonna play tonight. So they're gonna have to get a little creative with that lineup with Turner still on the DL. I'm guessing we're gonna see Kiki Hernandez probably at second base with Rollins staying at shortstop.
That's what I would think. Yeah. Maybe
I
Alex
mean,
Guerrero gets in there at some point.
yeah, I mean, I think he's gonna have to play third already because Turner's out.
Yeah,
So
that's a
like
good point.
they're starting to get light on players right now.
Yeah.
So you got to think all these cheap guys are going to be in the lineup. That's one of the stacks I wrote up in the stacking article today. The Dodgers are a ridiculously cheap stack, so you can look into that one. I mean, obviously Adrian Gonzalez is facing a lefty, which always makes that a tricky stack because they do have a lot of lefty killers, but Gonzalez has not been very good against lefties this year, and he's like their most expensive hitter right in the middle of the lineup, so it makes it kind of tough.
Yeah.
Elsewhere at second base, I'm thinking Paredes is probably going to hit a little bit higher in the lineup today. They're facing a lefty. I'm guessing Parr is probably not going to hit second because he's been struggling against lefties. So we'll have to see what they do with that lineup. But if Paredes is hitting high in the lineup for 3,400, I think he's a pretty interesting option against a lefty in Nuno.
Yeah, I really like that option as well. Even his teammate Jonathan Scope's been hitting pretty well. I think due to his price at 3,900, being near the top will probably be pretty low owned in your tournaments. But the only other guy I'm really considering is Brandon Phillips, leading off against Ian Kennedy. Kennedy has been bad against righties in this reverse split this year, 367 WOBA allowed. So if you're not playing Kennedy, and you probably aren't very much at least, I like Brandon Phillips up the top of that order.
Yeah, speaking of that, moving on to third base, Todd Frazier is only 3,800 on DraftKings.
Yep.
He's underpriced on both sites now. Facing Kennedy, he's obviously been struggling lately. He's a little banged up right now. But if he's in the lineup at 3,800, that's tough to pass up.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, Kennedy's been pretty bad against righties. He's got I think 247 ISO against righties right now, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
So I really like him and Phillips. I really like a lot of the Reds today if you're not playing Kennedy because, I mean, there's a chance he blows up today. It's not an easy matchup with Cincinnati, despite the fact that they're missing a lot in the middle of their lineup right now. Manny Machado, you mentioned already, is probably my top play at third base overall. If you're not considering price, because he's 5,000, it's tough to fit. But if you're using Nice, I mean, it's definitely more than doable.
Yeah, and a couple other guys we already mentioned, some Washington guys who could play at third base. Rendon and Zimmerman both have eligibility there. As far as really cheap guys, we mentioned Alex Guerrero kind of been passing. If he's in the lineup at 2,300, hasn't been a very good hitter this year really at all, but if you just need to save money, I mean, I don't think he's a bad option.
Yeah, I mean, I'm expecting him to be in the lineup somewhere tonight, especially if Kendrick's out. I don't see a way they can avoid playing him. They've already been playing him way more often with Turner out of the lineup, using him at third base. He's been supposedly a lefty killer, but he hasn't been very good this year, like you mentioned. I think he's dealing with some kind of injury. I mean, he just hasn't been good lately. But at that price, I mean, it's hard not to play him against a lefty if he's going to be in the sixth hole or something like that with third base and outfield eligibility.
Yeah, I think the only thing really hurt maybe is his pride because Don Mattingly obviously hates it. He never wants to play the guy.
No.
Yeah, either way, he's a good cheap option as most of the Dodgers are. And speaking of one at shortstop, Kike Hernandez, we already touched on. He's only 2,200 at shortstop.
Yeah.
So he's one of the better value plays because, like you said, he's pretty much going to have to play tonight. You're certainly not paying up at shortstop. I'm not a big fan of Jose Reyes against Nice. He hasn't been that good anyway. Nice has been good. Alcides Escobar is usually a fine cash game play, but I'm not paying top shelf pricing for a guy that's really, singles, doubles hitter. Ian Desmond's a nice tournament option at $3,300. Finally showing some power that he wasn't earlier in the season. And then really outside of that, I mean, I like Cesar Hernandez because he always has that stolen base upside at $3,400. Yeah,
that was the last one I had. I don't mind Jimmy Rollins, I guess, if he's hitting leadoff again, which he's probably going to be if Howie Kendrick is out like it looks like he's going to. He's okay. I mean, I would prefer to go cheaper, I think, though, if you can.
Yeah.
With Hernandez. I think that's probably the way I'm going to go a lot. Either Hernandez, Kiki or Caesar, I think, are the two ways I'm going to go the most. You mentioned Escobar. I think he's a rock-solid cash game play, but I don't feel like I want to play him very much in GPPs.
No, not at all. I mean, even his 5-for-5 nights include 5 singles, so there's not a whole lot of upside there. Outfield options, Nelson Cruz has got to be your top play. $5,500 gets a lefty in Chen. Obviously, Chen a solid pitcher, but I'm not playing Trout against Sale. You're only doing that in tournaments just to try to be different. Harper against Brett Anderson isn't a terrible option as far as lefty-lefty matchups go, but still not one you want to pay premium price tag for. The other 5K plus guy is Lorenzo Cain, and I love playing him tonight. Gets Matt Boyd, a bad lefty. Cain's just been really showing his versatility recently. Stole a base in his last game. Game before that had a double and a triple. The guy can do it all, and I feel like it's another one of those nights whenever you see him, 5K and up, nobody's ever on him, and I love playing him.
Yeah, definitely. He's probably my favorite outfield play today, actually. Like you mentioned, Trout has a tough matchup with Sale. Harper has a pretty tough matchup with Anderson. Anderson's struggled quite a bit lately, but he's been pretty darn good against lefties.
Yep.
So I'm not loving Harper at that price. Nelson Cruz, obviously, is a pretty top play, but I like Chen quite a bit tonight, too. So it's going to be hard for me to use him a ton. Although Chen is giving up a ton of power to righties. So that's definitely a play that is rightfully going to be pretty heavily owned.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I mean, there's not a ton else I like expensive-wise in the outfield. Cespedes I like for 4,400 against Gray. We mentioned Gray's not very good. Justin Upton facing Holmberg, which is a pretty good matchup, but not only has Upton been awful against lefties this year, but Holmberg's actually been pretty good over the first couple games. So I don't know if that's something I really want to pay 4,500 for. I'd much rather play Cespedes, for instance, at that price. I mean, Gray's probably a better pitcher overall than Holmberg, but I mean, he's struggled a little bit, and he's going to have to get it going before I really respect him. And Cespedes has been pretty good lately. Zobrist is a guy I like in the outfield if you're using somebody else at second base, like we mentioned.
Yep.
And then I had a couple other guys in here. For the Orioles, if it really depends on where they're at in the lineup with what they're doing with Parra and a 2-hole and stuff. But I mean, Adam Jones is going to be a pretty good play at third, hitting third in the lineup. He's only
4,100.
4,100.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's the guy I was looking for, and I couldn't find him. But yeah, I think he's a pretty solid play. Then it depends on what they do with the rest of their outfield. If Nolan Reimold is hitting in a decent spot, he's okay. He's pretty close to the minimum here. Not a ton else I like cheap-wise outside of the obvious guy who I can't believe I haven't mentioned yet. Scott Van Slyke is probably going to be hitting fourth against Gio Gonzalez at 2,600.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely like him. I mean, we know the kind of power. He hasn't shown it as much this year, but we know he still has it. Definitely a great tournament option for really, really cheap.
Yeah.
A couple other guys, Marlon Byrd, another Reds righty against homer-prone Ian Kennedy. Also, I like David Peralta and Ender Inciarte, really. Prefer Peralta because he's got much higher upside, a lot more power. But I think either one of those guys is in a fine spot there. Mark Trumbo, if you want to just chase power, but like you said, Chen actually pretty good so far. I like the pair of the Philly lefties there, Don Brown and Odubel Herrera, both at $3,600. Both guys hitting the ball really well. I mean, as the whole team seems to be, but I'm certainly won't be playing any righties against De La Rosa, but all the lefties in play for me, regardless of their price and GBPs at least.
Yeah, same here. Last couple guys I'll mention. Puig is still only 3,000 on DraftKings. I think he's a fine play also. I mean, he's been great against lefties this year quietly. I think he has a 391 WOBA and a 244 ISO. That's just a ridiculously cheap price, even though Gio Gonzalez is a pretty good lefty.
Yep.
Jason Worth is a guy that has really good career numbers against lefties, but has been struggling a little bit this year coming back from injury. He's only 2,900 against Anderson, who, as we mentioned, has been much worse against righties than lefties. And I had one other guy in here that I was going to mention. Oh, AJ Pollock is pretty interesting for me. Even if you're not stacking Arizona, I like him quite a bit. He's going to be way under-owned at 4,600, even against Serang. Outside of stacks, I think he's a pretty interesting play in the 2-hole there in front of Goldschmidt.
Yeah, I really like that. And then I got one more low-owned guy for you for your tournaments. Alex Rios gets a lefty Boyd. Rios throughout his career, another one of those guys throughout his career, hits lefties really well. You don't like his lineup spot. He bats down order, but he's been fairly consistent recently, so hit a couple doubles over the past few games. You're not chasing a monster game from him, but at $3,100, he's a nice filler that's going to be probably less than 5% owned, I would think.
Yeah, I like that one too.
All right, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our optimizer. A lot of great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.